Minnesota's dangerous message to Anthony Edwards. The Timberwolves did not just trade for LaMelo Ball. They sent a warning to the entire NBA. Anthony Edwards is not available, and Minnesota is willing to risk everything to prove it. Most fans thought this was just another blockbuster move, a flashy name, a new backcourt, a highlight machine next to one of the most explosive scorers in basketball. But underneath the headlines, this trade was about something much bigger. It was about pressure. It was about fear. It was about a franchise realizing that if it did not act now, the most important player in its history could eventually start wondering whether his future belonged somewhere else. That is what makes this deal so dangerous. Minnesota had already been close. Back-to-back deep playoff runs. Big expectations. A superstar in Anthony Edwards, who looked ready to take over the league. But every time the Timberwolves got near the top of the Western Conference, the same weakness came back to hurt them. They did not have a true playmaker who could control the offense, punish double teams, and make life easier for Ant when the game slowed down. Opposing defenses knew it. The Thunder knew it. The Spurs knew it. Every serious contender knew it. Trap Edwards, force the ball out of his hands, and make somebody else beat you. That problem had been building for years. So Tim Connolly made the kind of move that can either save a franchise or haunt it for a decade. He gave up Naz Reid, valuable future picks, and a massive amount of flexibility to bring LaMelo Ball to Minnesota. On paper, the idea is electric. LaMelo pushes the pace. He sees passing angles most guards do not even imagine. He can shoot deep threes, throw lobs, create rhythm, and turn a predictable offense into something chaotic and dangerous. But this is not a safe bet. LaMelo comes with questions, health questions, defensive questions, shot selection questions, playoff questions, and now all of those questions are sitting directly beside Anthony Edwards on a team that cannot afford to waste time. So here is the real question. Did Minnesota just give Ant the co-star he has been waiting for? Or did they make the gamble that could break everything? Tell me where you are watching from right now. If you think LaMelo and Ant will become the most dangerous backcourt in the NBA, comment 1. If you think this trade is too risky, comment 2. And make sure you subscribe, because this Timberwolves story is only getting started. The trade that changed everything. The deal moved fast because Minnesota did not want hesitation to become weakness. LaMelo Ball and Josh Green were headed to the Timberwolves. Naz Reid, future draft control, and valuable picks were headed to Charlotte. On paper, it looked like a basketball transaction. In reality, it was a message wrapped inside a gamble. Naz Reid was not just a throw-in. He was loved in Minnesota. He was the kind of player fans felt connected to because his story was built on patience, growth, and loyalty. He went from undrafted question mark to 6th man of the year, from bench weapon to a player many believed deserved a bigger role. After Julius Randle was moved, it looked like Reid's time had finally arrived. Then 3 days later, he was gone. That is what made this move sting. The Wolves did not just trade picks from some distant future. They traded a piece of their emotional identity. They traded the player who represented development, toughness, and the connection between the team and the city. But Tim Connolly was not thinking emotionally. He was thinking about Anthony Edwards being trapped in playoff possessions with 2 defenders in front of him and no real playmaker beside him. He was thinking about the Thunder and Spurs exposing Minnesota's offense. He was thinking about a Western Conference that was getting younger, faster, and more dangerous. So he chose the harder path. LaMelo gives Minnesota something it has been missing: imagination. He does not just bring the ball up the floor, he changes the rhythm of the game. He sees cutters early. He throws passes before the defense understands what is happening. He can pull from deep, attack in transition, and force opponents to guard more than one creator. That matters because Edwards has been carrying too much weight. For too long, Minnesota's late-game offense depended on Ant creating magic through pressure. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he looked like the future face of the league. But in the playoffs, elite defenses do not live on hope. They adjust, they trap, they shrink the floor. They force your second and third options to prove they can punish them. That is where Minnesota kept falling short. This trade was the front office admitting the old formula was not enough. Not enough to win the West, not enough to beat Oklahoma City, not enough to survive Victor Wembanyama's Spurs, and maybe not enough to keep Anthony Edwards fully convinced that Minnesota was the place where his championship future could happen. So, the Wolves made the move, and now there is no pretending. This is not development anymore. This is not patience anymore. This is a franchise pushing its chips into the middle of the table and daring LaMelo Ball to become the missing piece. Why Anthony Edwards needed this? Anthony Edwards did not need another role player. He needed relief. That is the part casual fans sometimes miss. When a superstar is young, explosive, and fearless, people assume he can carry anything. They see the dunks, the step-back threes, the confidence, the interviews, the swagger, and they think pressure does not touch him. But pressure always finds a way. For Edwards, the pressure came in the form of double teams, night after night, playoff after playoff. Defenses loaded up on him because Minnesota did not have enough creation beside him. Once Karl-Anthony Towns was gone, the spacing changed. The geometry changed. The way opponents defended the Wolves changed. The message became simple: make someone other than Ant beat us. And in the regular season, talent can hide that problem. In the playoffs, it gets exposed. Every possession slows down. Every passing lane gets smaller. Every weakness becomes a target. Edwards could still score, but he had to work too hard for everything. He had to fight through bodies, create through traps, and carry an offense that often looked stuck when the first action failed. That is exhausting. The danger was not that Edwards was about to leave immediately. The danger was that frustration can grow quietly. It starts with a missed opportunity, then another playoff loss, then another offseason where the roster still does not make sense. Then the whispers begin. Other teams start watching, other stars start texting, other front offices start hoping. That is how NBA pressure works. Minnesota knew it could not wait until the problem became public and impossible to control. Once a franchise player starts questioning the direction, every move becomes desperate. The Wolves had to act before the story turned into, can Minnesota keep Anthony Edwards? That is why LaMelo mattered. He gives Ant someone who can organize the floor, someone who can turn defensive attention into open shot, someone who can make Gobert a lob threat again, hit shooters in rhythm, and let Edwards attack from better spots instead of forcing him to solve every possession alone. If this works, Ant becomes more dangerous, not less important. He can conserve energy, he can hunt mismatches, he can close games instead of dragging the offense through every minute. LaMelo can create the first advantage, and Edwards can deliver the final blow. That is the dream version. But dreams in the NBA come with pressure, because if LaMelo cannot stay healthy, cannot defend enough, or cannot control his shot selection, the burden will fall right back on Edwards. Only this time, Minnesota will have fewer picks, less flexibility, and less room to fix the mistake. That is why this trade is not just about LaMelo. It is about whether Minnesota truly understands what Anthony Edwards needs before frustration turns into something much more dangerous. Tim Connolly's all-in pattern, Tim Connolly does not build quietly. That has become clear in Minnesota. Some front offices protect assets, wait for perfect timing, and avoid the kind of moves that can make them look foolish. Connolly is different. He sees a window and he attacks it. Sometimes that makes him look bold. Sometimes it makes him look reckless. But either way, the league always notices. The Rudy Gobert trade was the first warning. Minnesota gave up a mountain of picks for a defensive center at a time when many people thought the price was impossible to justify. The reaction around the NBA was brutal. People laughed. Analysts questioned it. Fans wondered if the Wolves had just destroyed their future. Then Minnesota started winning. Back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearances changed the conversation. The trade did not bring a championship, but it made the Timberwolves relevant in a way they had not been for years. For a franchise that had spent so long outside the serious title picture, that mattered. But then came the Towns trade. That one felt different. Karl-Anthony Towns was not just another player. He had history with the franchise. He had carried bad teams, survived criticism, and represented an era of Minnesota basketball. Moving him for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo was another massive bet, but this time the emotional cost was heavier, and the results were complicated. Randle did not become the long-term answer. DiVincenzo's injury changed the depth picture. Towns winning elsewhere made the optics even more painful. Suddenly, the front office looked less like a genius gambler and more like a man trying to stay ahead of the consequences of his own risks. That is the backdrop to the LaMelo trade. Connolly was not operating from a place of comfort. He was operating from pressure. The West had moved. Oklahoma City looked terrifying. San Antonio had a generational force changing the conference. Minnesota had a superstar in Edwards who was ready to win now, but the roster still had obvious flaws, so Connolly doubled down. Instead of pulling back after a messy trade history, he made another enormous swing. He traded beloved depth. He gave up future control. He bet that public perception of LaMelo was incomplete. He bet that inside a winning environment, next to Edwards and Gobert, LaMelo could become the player Minnesota needed him to be. That is courage. It is also danger, because when you make one risky trade, people call it bold. When you make several, people start judging the pattern. If LaMelo works, Connolly looks like the executive who refused to waste Anthony Edwards' prime. If it fails, every previous move comes back into the conversation, and the question becomes whether Minnesota was building a contender or chasing one gamble after another. This is the price of being all in. You do not get to hide behind patience. You either win or the bill comes due. Why LaMelo could unlock the Wolves? The best version of LaMelo Ball makes this trade look brilliant. That is what Minnesota is betting on. Not the inconsistent version, not the injured version, not the player critics describe when they talk about risky shots and defense. The Wolves are betting on the version who sees the floor like a magician, pushes pace like chaos is a weapon, and turns ordinary teammates into easier scoring options. That version fits Anthony Edwards beautifully. Ant is already one of the most explosive scorers in the league. He can get downhill, he can shoot over defenders, he can punish switches, he can take over late in games when the moment demands it. But what he has needed is someone who can make the game easier before those final possessions arrive. LaMelo can do that. He can bring the ball up and force defenses to make decisions early. If they drop back, he can shoot. If they press up, he can pass behind them. If the weak side falls asleep, he can hit the corner. If Gobert slips to the rim, LaMelo can find him above the defense. That kind of vision changes the way a team breathes offensively. Suddenly, Edwards does not have to create everything from nothing. He can catch the ball in rhythm. He can attack a tilted defense. He can become even more dangerous off the ball, where his athleticism and shooting make him a nightmare. Instead of facing two defenders already waiting for him, Ant can receive the ball after LaMelo has already bent the defense. That is a completely different game. The spacing also becomes more dangerous. Minnesota has shooters who can punish help. Ayo Dosunmu, Jaden McDaniels, Edwards, Josh Green, and eventually Dante DiVincenzo can all benefit from a true playmaker putting the ball exactly where it needs to be. When shooters trust the pass will arrive on time, confidence grows. When confidence grows, defenses stretch. When defenses stretch, Edwards gets driving lanes. That is the chain reaction Minnesota wants. And then there is pace. LaMelo loves playing fast. Edwards is terrifying in transition. Put those two together, and Minnesota could become one of the most exciting open floor teams in basketball. Missed shots could turn into instant pressure. Long rebounds could become layups. Lazy defensive balance could become highlight reels. But the real test will come in the half court. That is where playoff games are won. That is where LaMelo must prove he can be more than flashy. He has to manage tempo, he has to choose the right shot, he has to value possessions. He has to understand when Edwards needs the ball and when the team needs structure. If he does that, Minnesota's ceiling changes immediately. The Wolves did not trade for LaMelo because they needed entertainment. They traded for him because the offense needed a brain, a spark, and a second creator with enough talent to punish teams for trapping Anthony Edwards. If LaMelo becomes that player, the West has a serious problem. The risk no one can ignore. The problem with LaMelo Ball is not talent. The talent is obvious. Everyone can see it. The passes, the deep range, the confidence, the creativity, the size at point guard, those are not small things. There are nights when LaMelo looks like the kind of player who can change an entire offense by himself. But Minnesota is not paying for highlight. Minnesota is paying for trust. That is where the risk begins. LaMelo has had health concerns throughout his career. For a team trying to win right now, availability is not a minor detail. It is everything. A beautiful fit on paper means nothing if the star guard is not on the floor when the playoffs arrive. The Wolves cannot afford to build their entire offensive solution around a player who is unavailable when the pressure peaks. Then there is defense. Minnesota has built much of its identity on toughness, length, and defensive resistance. Anthony Edwards competes, Jaden McDaniels takes hard assignments, Rudy Gobert protects the rim. That structure can help cover LaMelo, but it cannot erase every mistake. In the playoffs, opponents hunt weak links. They force switches. They make your least reliable defender prove he can survive. LaMelo will be tested, and if he becomes a target, the Wolves will have a difficult choice. Do they keep him on the floor because the offense needs him, even if the defense bleeds points? Or do they adjust in ways that reduce the very reason they traded for him? That is where championship basketball becomes unforgiving. Shot selection is another concern. LaMelo can hit impossible shots, but not every impossible shot is a good decision. On a rebuilding team, those shots can be explained as freedom. On a contender, they can destroy momentum. A quick deep three with no rhythm feels different when Anthony Edwards is waiting, Gobert is running, and the game is tied with 2 minutes left. LaMelo has to mature inside the moment. That does not mean losing his creativity. Minnesota needs the creativity. But creativity without discipline becomes chaos. And chaos can be exciting in January while becoming dangerous in May. This is why the trade is so fascinating. The same traits that make LaMelo special can also make him risky. His confidence can lift the offense, or it can lead to rushed possessions. His flair can energize teammates, or it can frustrate them. His pace can overwhelm defenses, or it can create turnovers when the game demands patience. The Wolves are betting the good outweighs the bad. More importantly, they are betting their culture can sharpen him. They believe playing next to Edwards on a team with real stakes will bring out the competitor inside LaMelo. They believe winning pressure can focus him. They believe the public has misunderstood who he can become in the right environment. That belief better be right, because if it is wrong, this trade will not just be remembered as a mistake. It will be remembered as the move Minnesota made when it had Anthony Edwards, knew the stakes, and still chose the wrong co-star. The pain of losing Naz Reid. Every blockbuster trade has a cost, and for Minnesota fans, this one hurt. Naz Reid was not just a trade piece. He was a fan favorite, a symbol of development, patience, and loyalty. He went from undrafted player to sixth man of the year, and after Julius Randle was moved, many believed his bigger role had finally arrived. Then, just like that, he was gone. Minnesota understood the logic. Anthony Edwards needed a real point guard. LaMelo Ball gave the Wolves a higher offensive ceiling. But losing Reid still felt personal because he represented the heart of the roster. The basketball cost is real too. Reid gave Minnesota scoring, spacing, energy, and front court flexibility. With both Reid and Randle gone, the Wolves now have a clear hole at power forward. That matters in a Western Conference filled with size, length, and physical teams. So now the trade comes with a condition. LaMelo has to make the pain worth it. If he unlocks Edwards and turns Minnesota into a real title threat, fans may accept the sacrifice. If he struggles, every Naz Reid highlight in Charlotte will feel like a reminder of what the Wolves gave away. Minnesota is not finished. The LaMelo trade solved one major problem, but it created another. Minnesota finally has the playmaker Anthony Edwards needed, but the roster is still incomplete. After moving Julius Randle and Naz Reid, the Wolves need a power forward who can defend, rebound, space the floor, and fit beside Rudy Gobert. That is not easy, especially with limited assets and salary restrictions. LaMelo and Edwards can make Minnesota explosive, but playoff basketball demands balance. The Wolves cannot survive on star power alone. They need size against the Thunder, Spurs, and other physical Western teams. They need depth. They need smart role players who do not need the ball, but can still impact winning. That is why the next move mattered. The headline was LaMelo, but the move that completes the team may be quieter. The right power forward, the right bench piece, the right defensive fit. Minnesota has already made the bold move. Now it must make the smart one. The work is not done. The three possible futures. There are three ways this LaMelo experiment can go. The first is the dream. LaMelo stays healthy, buys in, and becomes the playmaker Edwards has needed. The offense opens up, Gobert gets easier looks, shooters find rhythm, and Ant becomes even more dangerous late in games. In that version, Minnesota becomes a real threat in the West. The second is the disaster. LaMelo struggles with health, defense, or shot selection. The front court hole becomes bigger, the lost picks feel heavier, and Edwards is still carrying too much. If that happens, the question returns louder than ever. Did Minnesota fail its superstar? The third is the middle. LaMelo plays well enough to make the Wolves exciting, but not well enough to make them champions. They win games, create highlights, and stay relevant, but still fall short when the playoffs get serious. That may be the most dangerous outcome because Minnesota did not make this trade just to be fun. They made it to win. Now, every game will be watched differently. Every LaMelo decision, every Edwards reaction, every late game possession will matter. The Wolves wanted pressure. Now they have it. The lesson behind Minnesota's gamble. The Timberwolves made a basketball trade, but the lesson goes far beyond basketball. When a franchise has a player like Anthony Edwards, patience becomes complicated. You cannot panic every time the team loses. You cannot chase every big name just because the fans are restless. But you also cannot sit still while your superstar carries too much pressure and the rest of the league starts circling. Minnesota chose action. That choice deserves respect. It takes courage to admit the roster is not enough. It takes courage to move a beloved player like Naz Reid. It takes courage to sacrifice future assets for a player who comes with real questions. But courage is only valuable when it is matched by responsibility. That is where the Wolves must be careful. LaMelo Ball cannot be treated like a magic fix. He is not here to erase every weakness by himself. He is here to become part of a structure that must be built correctly. The coaches must hold him accountable. The veterans must help him adjust. Edwards must trust him, but LaMelo must earn that trust with winning habits, not just flashy passes. Talent opens the door. Discipline keeps it open. The biggest lesson for Minnesota is that protecting a franchise player is not only about giving him another star, it is about giving him a real plan, a balanced roster, honest communication, a culture that does not panic when pressure rises. Edwards needs to feel that the front office is aggressive, but also clear. Bold, but not reckless. Loyal to winning, but not careless with the future. For LaMelo, this is also a turning point. He is no longer just the exciting guard on a rebuilding team. He He is now the co-star beside one of the league's most important young players. That means every possession matters more. Every defensive effort matters more. Every shot choice matters more. The spotlight is bigger, but so is the opportunity. If he embraces it, his career changes. For Edwards, this is a test of leadership. Great players want help, but they also have to make that help work. He must lead with patience, confidence, and maturity. If LaMelo makes mistakes, Ant cannot let frustration divide the team. If the roster needs time, he has to keep the locker room steady. That is what franchise players do. And for the fans, the lesson is simple. Championship windows are fragile. They require risk, but they also require perspective. Not every move will feel comfortable. Not every sacrifice will feel fair. But the goal should always be bigger than ego, bigger than noise, and bigger than drama. Minnesota is trying to win. LaMelo is trying to prove he can lead winning basketball. Edwards is trying to become the face of a championship team. Now, all three stories are connected. So if you believe this gamble will turn the Timberwolves into a true title threat, comment 1. If you believe the risk is too big and Minnesota may regret it, comment 2. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with another NBA fan. Because this LaMelo and Anthony Edwards story could become one of the biggest turning points in the league.